Right now, you might be lying awake in the dazed aftermath of a sudden, crushing collapse. The career path you walked for decades has abruptly vanished, or the relationship that formed your foundational anchor has completely shattered in a single afternoon. You feel a raw, disoriented panic, staring into the dark as if the entire roof of your existence has been violently ripped away by an unexpected storm. You are surrounded by the invisible splinters of a life plan you labored for years to construct. Your mind is frantically picking through the wreckage, trying to figure out how something so solid could dissolve so fast. This sudden disruption leaves you feeling deeply exposed, stranded in the cold debris of a tomorrow you did not choose. You are overthinking the wreckage, wondering if you could have held the beams together through greater effort. Let us notice the unique, quiet landscape of your room tonight. The air carries a crisp scent of damp heartwood, wet pine bark, and cool forest moisture. Your limbs are supported by a mattress that feels like heavy, unyielding cedar planks wrapped in dense, rough linen. A single, soft amber hue glimmers from a low oil lamp on the floor, casting long shadows across the timber beams above your head. Outside the walls, a gentle mountain river moves with a steady, rhythmic rush over smooth stones, its white noise filling the night with an unhurried current. The chaotic world has pulled back into the fog, leaving you in a safe timber yard where you do not have to rebuild anything tonight. The environment demands absolutely nothing from your tired muscles. Tonight, we are offering your weary spirit a very gentle and quiet protection. You are not a broken failure because your outer structure has collapsed. The tearing down of your security is not a verdict on your personal worth. Nothing will be aggressively forced upon your awareness during these dark hours. We will not command your mind to magically rebuild your career before dawn, and we will not force your heart to pretend that this deep grief does not sting. We are simply going to allow your bleeding palms to let go of the ropes, providing a soft shelter where you can rest exactly as you are. Your soul is permitted to sit in the open clearing without a single blueprint. Maybe you have felt this intense driving urgency to fix the wreckage immediately. Your intellect believes that if you just worry with enough force, you can hoist the fallen beams back into place through pure willpower. But a surprising insight of the Buddha reminds us that the primary collapse is not what truly exhausts your life force. The mind does not find safety by fighting the momentum of a changing river. Peace arrives when you stop treating the open, empty ground as an active disaster. Overthinking is not a tool that can repair a broken joint. It is fear pretending to protect you from the inevitable flow of reality. Suffering grows when we try to force a dismantled structure to stand in a torrent. Let us think about the immense labor your mind has been performing since the disruption occurred. You have been lying awake for hours, trying to wedge small thoughts into the cracks of your past. You replay the exact moment the structure gave way, wondering what word you could have spoken to prevent the split. You look toward your future and see nothing but a raging torrent of uncertainty that threatens to sweep away your remaining dignity. This constant anticipation is a heavy burden. You are acting like a frantic craftsman trying to wedge brittle pine twigs under a falling oak roof during a flash flood. You are exhausting your physical body to preserve an old design that the river of time has already dismantled. Dear friend, take a slow, effortless breath into the lower spaces of your stomach. Let the cool river air fill your lungs completely, without trying to force your ribs into a perfect state of expansion. Just feel the simple, physical rise of your chest, and then let the breath release slowly through your lips like a quiet current entering the room. There is no supervisor you need to appease tonight, and there is no domestic crisis you need to resolve at midnight. If your chest feels heavy and raw, allow it to be heavy. You do not need to alter your physical sensations to be worthy of this quiet shelter. You are safe enough to soften. Perhaps you have spent your entire life believing that safety is something you must construct through unceasing effort. You might have built your identity around being the strong provider, the reliable anchor, or the flawless architect who never lets a single timber slip. When the river of change unexpectedly sweeps away that role, you feel an overwhelming sense of shame. You look at the empty riverbank and believe you have failed at existence itself. But this self-judgment is a second unnecessary wound that you are inflicting upon your own tired heart. The river did not rise to punish you. It rose because it is the nature of water to move. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter about the nature of this empty ground. We will journey to a turbulent river bend to meet a young timber framer who had to face the ultimate collapse of his life's work. We will find out how a soul can stop fighting the torrent to preserve a broken frame. But before we travel down that winding mountain path, let us give your tight neck a chance to relax. You are safe enough to suspend the emergency of your disruption for the evening. The need to rebuild can wait in the darkness, and the fear of the future can remain unresolved. Let us leave the splintered debris of your plans behind and allow your body to sink into the wide, supportive space of the night. Think of how much vitality you consume when you try to hold up a falling structure with your bare hands. One thought tells you that your life is permanently ruined, and another thought arrives to convince you that you are entirely to blame. A third thought warns you that you will never find solid ground again, and soon your entire body is locked in a state of rigid resistance. This is the pattern of mental grasping that turns your bedroom into a site of exhaustion. You are treating a temporary transition as if it were a permanent sentence of destruction. You do not have to solve the design of your new life tonight. You only need to stop holding the broken beams in the wind. Every time you refuse to answer an anxious prediction about your security, you are choosing your own well-being. Every time you allow your landscape to be empty without trying to instantly fill it with frantic plans, you are practicing profound wisdom. This is a quiet rebellion against the driving speed of the modern world. Your fear always insists that you must fix the structure right now, or you will wash away completely. But the night is built for non-seeking. The night is an unconditioned sanctuary, where the demand for structural rigidity is entirely canceled. As you lie here, imagine the midnight river moving past the timber yard outside. The water does not apologize for changing its course, and the riverbank does not fight the current when the soil shifts. They simply meet one another in the darkness, moving through a natural cycle of erosion and renewal without a single ounce of judgment. You can do the exact same thing with your awareness right now. You can let the natural gravity of sleep pull you downward, away from the loud groans of your self-criticism, and into the cool, spacious depths of pure, unbothered existence. Allow your physical form to sink a fraction deeper into the linen bedding. You are fully supported by an ancient, stable foundation that has held 1,000 disrupted travelers before you, and you do not need to hold your breath rigid anymore. Let the frantic scenarios circle your mind if they must, but do not swim out to meet them. Let them spend their own volatile energy against the walls of the room, while you rest safely in the quiet core below. We are moving toward a place of deeper understanding. Step by step, breath by breath, let the dark valley of the night hold your emotional fatigue, while we prepare our hearts to receive the lesson of the sheared peg. To understand how the mind traps itself in the wake of a sudden collapse, we must leave the landscape of your bedroom behind. We must follow a winding trail that drops deep into the damp, shadowed valleys where the mountain rivers run wide and dangerous. Long before your own life plans were disrupted, a young artisan named Kalen lived at the sharpest bend of a rushing northern waterway. Kalen was a master timber framer, a man who understood the secret grain of every tree in the forest. He spent 10 long years constructing a massive, interlocking wooden deflector grid along the riverbank to protect his timber yard. This structure was his life work, made of heavy oak beams held together by thick dowels. He believed this framework was a permanent fortress that would guarantee his security forever. Every joint in Kalen's deflector was perfectly chiseled, fitting together with absolute mathematical precision. He took immense pride in the rigidity of his creation, viewing it as a monument to his own skill and foresight. He felt a deep sense of superiority as he watched the daily currents slide harmlessly against his heavy wooden wall. But one dark autumn night, a historic cloudburst occurred high up on the mountain peaks. A massive wall of muddy water, saturated with uprooted trees and rolling boulders, came tearing down the canyon. The river rose 10 feet in an hour, slamming into Kalen's rigid structure with a terrifying hydraulic roar. The immense torque of the floodwaters found the single point of greatest resistance in the framework. With a sudden sound like a cracking whip, the primary oak dowel pin that anchored the entire foundation sheared cleanly in half. The main structural beam began to sag under the relentless weight of the mountain torrent. Kalen did not stop to evaluate the shifting landscape, and he did not accept that the river had altered its volume. A wild, dazed panic consumed his mind. He grabbed a handful of small, brittle pine twigs from the forest floor and began frantically shoving them into the empty dowel hole. He exhausted his muscles for hours, screaming against the roar of the water, trying to hold a shifting tenton log in place with his raw palms. Near the peak of his desperation, an elderly river watcher named Master Un walked down to the flooded bank. Master Un was a quiet wattle weaver who lived in a small turf hut right where the water moved fastest. He spent his days observing the currents, watching how the river carved the earth and reshaped the banks after every seasonal storm. He did not carry heavy tools, and he did not attempt to build permanent monuments against the water. He simply moved through the valley with an unhurried grace, holding a long willow staff to guide his steps through the mud. He stood on the slippery bank, watching Kalen's bleeding hands frantically wedge the useless pine twigs into the failing joint. Master Un did not shout at the young man to stop, and he did not offer to help him hold the collapsing beam. He reached down into the swirling eddy near his feet and pulled a floating object out of the cold brown foam. He walked over to the sagging framework, waiting patiently until Kalen collapsed onto the wet gravel from absolute physical exhaustion. The young artisan was trembling from the cold river spray, his chest heaving with ragged gasps, his mind completely broken by the sight of his ruined lifework. Master Un did not offer a single word of philosophy. He simply placed the wet object he had salvaged directly into Kalen's raw, blistered palms. Kalen looked down at his hands, his fingers registering the smooth, slippery texture of a fractured piece of wood. It was the sheared oak dowel pin that had snapped during the initial impact of the flood. The object was about the width of a human wrist, its outer surface still showing the careful tool marks Kalen had chiseled years ago. But the center of the peg was completely transformed. It was broken cleanly in two, revealing a jagged white explosion of raw splinters, where the fiber of the wood had been violently twisted apart by the torque of the river. The very strength that Kalen had relied upon had become the cause of its destruction. Master Un pointed his willow staff toward the raging river, then looked down at the broken peg in the young man's lap. He asked Kalen why he was trying to replace a giant oak heartwood pin with fragile pine twigs while the flood was still at its height. Kalen wept bitterly, his tears mixing with the muddy river water on his cheeks. He cried out that if he let the beam go, his entire yard would be washed away, and his 10 years of labor would mean absolutely nothing. He believed that the collapse of his wooden wall was the end of his entire existence. He was treating the broken joint as a personal verdict on his worth as a craftsman. The old river watcher knelt down in the mud beside the weeping artisan, his calm presence acting like an anchor in the midst of the roaring storm. He told Kalen to look closely at the jagged white splinters in the center of the sheared peg. He explained that the oak pin did not snap because it was weak or poorly made. It snapped because it was completely unyielding, standing stiff against a volume of water that required absolute movement. The rigid wood had resisted the current until the pressure grew too heavy for its fibers to bear. Master Un whispered that the river was not trying to destroy the timber yard. It was simply reclaiming the space it needed to flow safely through the valley. Kalen stared at the broken dowel, a sudden wave of deep emotional recognition hitting his chest with the force of an undercurrent. He looked at the massive sagging beam, which was still groaning under the weight of the water, and he realized the absolute futility of his struggle. He saw that his frantic panic, his bleeding hands, and his desperate use of pine twigs were not protecting his yard. They were merely extensions of his own rigid refusal to accept that the landscape had changed. He had been trying to force a dead design to stand in a living river, and the strain was destroying his own body. What happened next was not a dramatic exhibition of sudden mastery. Kalen did not instantly become a fearless sage, and the floodwaters did not miraculously recede back into the mountains. His shift was much smaller, much quieter and entirely hidden within his own physical posture. He looked at the sheared oak peg, and instead of clutching it tightly to his chest like a grievance, he allowed his fingers to relax their grip. He laid the broken piece of wood gently down on the wet stones at his feet, letting it rest in the mud without any further struggle. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since the bank collapsed, he took a slow, deep breath that traveled all the way down into his tense abdomen. He chose to perform one small act of internal discipline. He stopped trying to wedge the broken joint. He pulled his raw hands away from the heavy, sagging log, stepped back from the edge of the roaring current, and sat down flat on the open gravel bank beside Master Un. He allowed his body to become completely still in the midst of the wreckage, choosing to sit with the absolute uncertainty of his ruined yard without trying to fix it immediately. He stopped treating the thought of his failure as an absolute truth, allowing the structure to sag wherever the water pushed it. The old weaver smiled faintly, his hand resting lightly on his willow staff as the cold rain continued to fall across the plateau. The river continued to howl through the valley, carrying large fragments of the wooden wall down into the lower plains. But inside the young man's frame, the frantic emergency had completely lost its momentum. Kalen sat with his hands open on his knees, watching his 10 years of labor float away into the gray mist without launching a single scream against the sky. In a moment, this story will show us how this silent surrender can touch your own modern disruptions tonight. But as Kalen watched the muddy water reshape the riverbank, he was no longer bracing for a blow. He was simply breathing with the torrent, his spirit as wide, as empty, and as unshakable as the changing valley itself. When we look closely at Kalen sitting exhausted on that wet gravel bank, we are looking directly into the mirrors of our own midnight struggles. It is so easy to recognize our own tired hearts in his frozen silhouette. When your life encounters a sudden structural collapse, and the plans you spent years fitting together are torn apart by a sudden shift in conditions, your mind automatically begins to manufacture its own frantic wedges. You lie awake in the quiet dark, replaying the exact moment the joint split. You examine the letters, the sudden announcements, or the quiet betrayals, desperately wondering what single word or action could have prevented the timber from dropping. You try to force a finished chapter of your life to stand up straight in a raging current that has already moved downstream. This ancient river wisdom is not telling us to numb our senses to the raw sting of our personal losses. It is not asking you to become a cold stone wall that feels absolutely nothing when a major dream or a deep partnership is unexpectedly broken. The shock of an abrupt layoff, the disorientation of a sudden separation, and the heavy sorrow of watching a long-term goal dissolve are real, painful disruptions. They are the primary cloudbursts of human life. One of the great insights of the Buddha was that our lives will always be subject to these unexpected movements of the water. We cannot command the conditions of our careers to remain static forever, and we cannot force the hearts of others to stay anchored in a single place. The riverbanks will occasionally collapse, and old timber frames will eventually yield to the torque of time. Our deep agony begins when our own intellect refuses to let the landscape shift. The extra torment you feel tonight is not the raw reality of the changing river, but the frantic story your mind weaves on top of the empty bank. You look at the splintered wood, and you tell yourself that your entire worth as a human being has been completely erased by this single failure. You take a temporary seasonal disruption, and you turn it into a permanent verdict of personal bankruptcy. You are no longer just an artisan standing in a transformed clearing. You become a fundamentally broken failure who can never be trusted to build again. This internal self-prosecution is the very thing that tightens your chest and keeps your thoughts racing through the wreckage. Let us translate what the ancient texts called attachment into the emotional movements of your daily afternoon. Attachment is the tight, white-knuckled clenching that declares a specific structure must stand forever exactly as it was, or you can never be safe. It is the desperate muscle memory that keeps your arms extended into the freezing water, trying to hold up a waterlogged log that has already been dislodged by the torrent. When you operate from this state of internal rigidity, you treat every sudden change as an existential emergency. You cannot allow a career path to close without believing your intelligence has died. You cannot watch an old life plan dissolve without feeling that you have been completely cast out from reality. You have turned your past achievements into a heavy iron peg, and you are breaking your own fibers trying to hammer it into a river that refuses to hold it. The desperate craving for absolute certainty is the true current that creates the suffocating pressure in your lungs. We look at the wide, unwritten landscape of our upcoming years, and we feel a profound terror of the empty ground. We try to cure this disorientation by constantly replaying our past mistakes, hoping that if we analyze our history with enough intensity, we can find a way to wedge the broken joints of our yesterday back into alignment. But this constant mental auditing is a false protection. The sharp ache in your solar plexus right now is not a sign that your life has ended. It is simply the sound of your spirit resisting the natural movement of change. You are demanding that the riverbank remain completely rigid, rather than learning how to flow with the altered volume of the water. And this is precisely where the deeper meaning of our journey begins to reveal its true softness. The muddy mountain flood did not rise out of hatred for Kalen's timber yard. The current was simply doing what water must do when the high peaks release their winter accumulation. The torrent was wild, it was massive, and it was completely indifferent to his pride. It became a destructive force only because Kalen had built an unyielding obstacle directly in its natural path. He wanted to force the river to accommodate his dead design, and the water simply broke what refused to bend. Your current life disruption is that high mountain river tonight. The empty space left by your sudden loss is not a punishment designed to starve your soul. It is a neutral clearing that is waiting for you to stop your frantic wedging. True mindfulness is the gentle capacity to look at your ruined plans without calling yourself a disaster. It is the quiet willingness to witness the raw splinters of your broken security and to say to yourself, there is the fear of being unprotected. When you give the panic a soft name, you are no longer the victim trapped underneath the sagging beam. You are the spacious awareness that watches the timber float away, remaining completely whole and undamaged on the shore. You begin to realize that a thought of failure is just a single piece of driftwood passing through the wide stream of your consciousness. It does not own the river, and it cannot sink your true nature unless you jump into the torrent to hold it down. Releasing your grip on the broken framework does not mean you abandon your creative skill or your capacity to build a beautiful life. It means you stop using the wreckage of your past as a weapon against your current worth. The Buddha was not asking us to live without dreams or to become people who do not care about the stability of their homes. He was showing us how to stop adding a second, self-inflicted wound to the primary difficulties that life brings to our doors. The first wound is the sudden collapse of the structure we loved. The second wound is the frantic, midnight noise campaign we launch against our own minds when we believe that the collapse makes us completely worthless. Think of how much vitality you waste when you try to force a finished chapter of your life to stand upright in the dark. You search through your memories for alternative choices. You compare your empty clearing with the solid fortresses of your peers, and you let every unmade decision become an evidence of your inadequacy. This is the pattern of mental grasping that turns your bedroom into a site of exhaustion. You are demanding that a changing universe give you an absolute guarantee of safety before you allow your throat to relax. You do not have to solve the blueprint of your new career before the morning arrives. You can let the sheared peg rest in the mud and trust that your essential being is already secure without the old framework. Compassion begins when you look at your own raw, blistered awareness with an immense, unconditional tenderness. It is the soft recognition that you have been trying to hold up a heavy life for a very long time, carrying the responsibility of a massive structure through many difficult seasons. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to not know how to rebuild your future tonight. When you grant yourself permission to be completely unresolved at midnight, you are performing an act of radical spiritual healing. You are telling your anxious brain that it does not need to win a war against the changing river to be safe from destruction. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal. As you lie here in the dark, The vibrations of your daily struggles are still humming within your muscles. You cannot force an ended relationship to return to its original form through hours of internal argument. You cannot secure your entire financial future through midnight calculations of your past errors. Let the heavy oak beams of your old ambition slide into the deep current. Allow the thick fog of the night to absorb your unvoiced questions, and let your body remember that it belongs to the stable earth beneath you, completely independent of your structural successes. What if the empty ground left by your sudden disruption is not a terrifying void that needs to be filled with immediate frantic plans, but a clean, wide clearing where your spirit can finally breathe without a weight? When you cease the frantic wedging, the internal pressure begins to balance itself with the quiet flow outside. Your shoulders drop, your jaw unlocks, and the dense smoke of your overthinking begins to clear from your eyes. You are no longer a panicked craftsman drowning in the ruins of his timber yard. You are the wide river channel itself, holding the water, the banks, and the midnight stars in one magnificent, weightless embrace. Let us carry the damp, mineral coolness of that river valley directly into the immediate space where your body rests tonight. You do not need to change your posture, and you do not need to sit up to integrate this quiet awareness. Your bed is already a steady clearing, a solid timber yard where the frantic demands of the changing world can no longer touch your limbs. If it feels right, let your eyes remain gently closed, allowing the familiar contours of your room to dissolve into a soft, protective darkness. We are entering an hour of complete non-performance together. Tonight, there is no structural crisis you need to solve, no announcement you need to counter, and no requirement for you to magically repair your life plan before dawn. Simply remaining here, with your quiet breathing and your raw, exposed heart, is an act of profound wisdom. Take a slow, unhurried breath through your nose, letting the cool river air travel gently down into the lower spaces of your throat. Let that softness linger in your body for just a brief, comfortable moment, and then release it through your lips like a long, quiet sigh into the dark room. Feel your ribs drop slightly as the air leaves your frame. Let us do that once more, drawing in a fresh, quiet current from the stillness around you. As you exhale this time, let your shoulders sink a fraction deeper into the mattress. Imagine that the surface beneath you is made of ancient, unmoving cedar logs, completely solid and entirely capable of bearing your absolute exhaustion without shifting a single millimeter. You do not need to support the weight of your history anymore. You can fully give your physical frame away to the supportive gravity of the night. Now, let us bring our gentle awareness to the specific places where your feelings of structural disruption like to gather within your muscles. There is often a subtle, tight restriction in the back of your neck, a quiet fortress built from hours of bracing against the shock of change, pretending to be fine, and keeping your head high against the torrent of the world. If it feels right, let your neck soften slightly, allowing the muscles around your spine and throat to relax their guard. Move your attention down to your chest, to that raw, open clearing that has felt compressed by the sudden collapse of your security. See if you can allow that space to widen just a tiny bit on your next inhalation, not by forcing a deep breath, but by simply inviting the tight skin around your solar plexus to soften its boundary. Perhaps you can notice a subtle, resting warmth in the palms of your hands. Let your fingers curl softly against the fabric of your bedding, completely empty of any tools, ledgers, or heavy ropes. Your hands have labored intensely to hold your old world together, and they have gripped the handles of control with absolute tightness for many months. Tonight, they do not need to grasp anything at all. Let them rest by your side like two smooth willow branches that have washed onto a quiet gravel bank, completely detached from the force of the current. You are safe enough to let your fingers uncurl in the dark. As you lie here in this dark sanctuary, a specific thought will almost certainly drift into your awareness. A memory of the exact moment your structure gave way might float by, or a sharp, sudden anxiety about your financial survival might call out to you from tomorrow. When this happens, you do not need to fight the thought. There is no need to push the grief away with an aggressive mental hand, and you do not need to judge your heart for being restless. Instead, let us change our relationship to these internal visitors. If a wave of panic arises, Look at its shape with great gentleness and give it a simple, quiet name. You might silently say to yourself, there is the urge to wedge a broken joint, or there is the pattern of resisting the current. By naming the pattern, you are stepping back onto the dry riverbank. You are watching the muddy water move through the canyon without jumping into the flood. Let us bring our main practice image into our internal focus now. Imagine you are standing quietly at that sharp bend in the river, but the frantic urgency has completely left your spirit. The air is cool, smelling of wet bark and remarkably still. Suspended before you is the massive, sagging oak beam of your old life plan, representing all the expectations, the careers, and the relationships you have been straining to preserve. In your hands, you are holding the rough, wet hemp ropes that are tied to that heavy timber. Feel the abrasive texture of the rope against your raw palms. For days you have been pulling these lines with white knuckles, trying to hoist the log back into alignment, desperately demanding that the river return to its old boundaries. You are deeply tired from the strain. If it feels right, imagine your fingers gently opening their grip on those wet hemp lines. You are not letting go out of defeat, and you are not punishing yourself for trying to hold the structure together. You are simply relaxing your palms. Watch what happens in the quiet space of your awareness when you stop clenching the rope. The rough lines slip easily from your hands, dropping into the soft river moss beneath your feet without making a single sound. They rest there in the grass, losing their tension, slowly reclaiming the neutral stillness of the earth. The heavy tool of your resistance is gone. Now, notice the transformation of the scene before you. Without your hands pulling the ropes, you can watch the massive oak beam respond to the natural movement of the water. The heavy log sags lower, turns gracefully in the eddy, and then slips cleanly away from the broken bank. Look at that heavy timber floating peacefully down the wide river channel. It is no longer an obstacle, it is no longer a danger, and it is no longer a burden to your body. It moves with the water, sliding around the smooth stones, disappearing gradually into the soft gray mist downstream. The river has claimed the wreckage, leaving the bank beside you completely open, empty, and clean. Imagine that the sharp, raw panic inside your chest is transforming into a single, unworked wooden peg. It separates from your ribs, resting lightly in the open space of your heart. It carries the jagged splinters of your sudden disruption and your fear of the unknown future. You do not need to carve it, and you do not need to force it to disappear. Simply watch what happens when you let it sit in the warm, quiet current of your breath. On every gentle exhalation, the sharp splinters of that wooden peg begin to soften. The fibers gradually loosen their grip, rounding out into a smooth, natural form, melting beautifully and quietly into the wide, fluid spaciousness of your awareness. The wood dissolves into the water, and the water becomes completely still. Perhaps another anxious thought appears, reminding you of a structure you are still desperately trying to rebuild. You recognize the thought, you give it a soft name, and you let your fingers remain open. You watch the worry float away into the mist, while your chest releases another layer of its old constriction. Soon, the entire channel of your mind is filled with a beautiful, silent spaciousness, where the empty ground is no longer a terrifying ruin, but a wide, accommodating clearing that holds your life without a single condition. In a moment, the second story will show us an even deeper way to navigate this altered landscape. But right now, notice how much less energy it takes to drop the rope than to pull the timber. You are practicing the holy art of non-resistance. You are reminding your tired nervous system that safety is not found in the rigidity of your old structure, but in your capacity to flow with the living water. There is no need to force this meditation to be perfect tonight. If your thoughts pull you back into a loop of panic, that is completely natural for a heart that has experienced a sudden shock. As soon as you notice that you are pulling the rope again, gently, without a single shred of self-blame, relax your palms and return to the image of the wide, empty riverbank. Feel the slow, organic rise and fall of your chest as you rest in this dark room. Each inhalation is like a cool, healing current entering your lungs. Each exhalation is a release of the pressure to rebuild your past before the morning. The universe knows how to support you without your constant labor. Your heart knows how to beat, and your cells know how to repair themselves without your frantic calculations. You can retire from your position as the architect of your destiny for the remaining hours of the night. Let the river hold the weight, let the fog hold your grief, and let your quiet awareness sink into the vast, unbothered stillness that has been waiting to cradle your soul since the day began. The high mountain waters eventually lowered their ferocious volume, leaving behind a scarred landscape of wet clay and gray boulders. The initial crisis had passed. Yet the true emotional challenge was only beginning to settle into the marrow of Kalen's bones. The wreckage of his 10-year construction project lay scattered across the lower shallows, and the riverbank where his timber yard had stood was now a hollow, muddy crescent. He had stopped his frantic shouting against the sky, but a quiet, bitter numbness had taken up residence in his chest. He spent his mornings walking aimlessly through the silt, picking up broken shards of chiseled wood, looking at the empty sky, and wondering how he could ever find the energy to reconstruct his life from nothing. He felt trapped in a state of suspended animation, deeply terrified of the upcoming winter and entirely frozen by the fear of a second catastrophe. Every evening the river continued to make its low guttural sound, reminding him of what had been torn away. Kalen found himself constantly staring at the empty space where the main foundation beam had once rested. He was mentally trapped in a loop of silent resistance, believing that until he could erect another massive, unyielding barrier along the water's edge, he would remain completely unsafe. He could not look at the mud without feeling a deep surge of shame, as if the river had exposed his absolute incompetence to the entire valley. He was trying to heal his spirit by planning an even heavier, thicker wall of stone and iron, refusing to realize that his obsession with absolute rigidity was the very thing that was keeping his mind in a state of chronic alarm. One cold morning, when the first frost of winter had turned the river mud into a brittle white crust, Master Un walked into the empty timber yard. The old river watcher carried no heavy mallets, no iron spikes, and no measuring cords. He held nothing but a small bone-handled knife and a large bundle of long, green willow branches that he had harvested from the wetlands further upstream. The willow rods were supple, wet with their own pale sap, and smelled faintly of bitter green bark and cold river silt. He dropped the heavy bundle onto the frost-covered gravel near the water's edge, his old face calm and unreadable in the gray dawn light. He looked at Kalen, whose shoulders were still hunched tightly against the cold, and asked the young man to help him build a simple wattle fence along the softest part of the eroded bank. Kalen looked at the thin, flexible green twigs and felt a sudden wave of irritation. He told the old weaver that a fragile fence of woven sticks would be ripped apart by the first minor surge of the current. He stated that the bank required massive granite boulders and heavy oak pillars to withstand the power of the mountain water. He was completely convinced that anything less than absolute hardness was a total waste of labor, and he did not want to waste his remaining strength on something so small. Master Un did not argue with Kalen's engineering theories, and he did not try to convince him with long speeches about the philosophy of the valley. He simply took a single green willow branch from the bundle, held it before his chest with both hands, and slowly bent it into a tight, complete circle. The wood did not groan, it did not splinter, and it did not show a single sign of fracture. The supple green fibers slipped past one another with absolute ease, accommodating the pressure of his old fingers without a single point of resistance. The old man relaxed his hands, and the willow rod instantly snapped back into its original, straight form, entirely undamaged by the distortion. Master Un looked at the young craftsman and stated that the oak dowel pin had shattered because it could only exist in one single shape, while the willow survived precisely because it had no permanent form to defend. He then picked up a sharp wooden stake, drove it loosely into the mud near the waterline, and began to weave the long green branches around it in a slow, alternating pattern. He invited Kalen to join him, offering him a fresh handful of the wet willow rods. Kalen hesitated for a long moment, his old habits of control screaming inside his mind. He felt a deep aversion to working with a material that felt so soft, so unpredictable, and so completely contrary to his training as a timber framer. But as he looked at the old man's calm, deliberate movements, something inside his chest began to feel a tiny bit curious. He stepped down into the cold mud, took a long willow branch from the bundle and attempted to weave it into the stakes. Out of pure instinct, Kalen pulled the green rod with an intense white-knuckled force, trying to pull it into a perfectly straight, rigid line across the timberyard floor. With a sharp snap, the green bark split open, and the branch broke cleanly in his hands. Kalen cursed under his breath, his old frustration boiling back to the surface. He looked at the broken piece of wood, believing he had failed yet again. But Master Un stopped his own hands, looked gently at Kalen's tense fingers, and told him that he was still treating the willow as if it were a heavy beam of oak. He explained that he was trying to dominate the wood through sheer willpower, forcing it to submit to a design that was too tight for its nature. The old weaver whispered that to weave the willow safely, one must allow the hands to match the curve of the branch, guiding the wood rather than commanding it. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter about the way our spirits discover their true stability. But as Kalen took a second green branch from the bundle, he decided to try a different approach. He took a long, slow breath through his nose, letting his tight wrists loosen their grip on the wood. He moved his hands with a softer, slower rhythm, allowing the green rod to find its own natural path around the wooden stakes. He did not force the branch into a straight line. He simply guided its tip through the open gaps, letting the natural curve of the willow determine the shape of the weave. To his immense surprise, the wood slid smoothly into place, interlocking perfectly with the branches beneath it without a single splinter. They worked together for 3 hours in the cold morning light, their movements creating a low, rhythmic rustling that blended with the sound of the river. They chiseled no joints, they drove no iron spikes, and they did not try to create an unyielding wall against the water. They simply constructed a long, porous, flexible screen of interwoven willow branches that stretched across the entire hollow of the eroded bank. The structure looked remarkably fragile compared to the massive oak deflector that had been destroyed, but it possessed a strange, organic beauty that seemed to match the natural contours of the valley. Just as they finished the final row of weaving, a sudden winter thaw occurred up in the high mountain ravines. The temperature rose rapidly, and a fresh surge of muddy meltwater came rushing down the river channel, causing the current to swell and overflow its boundaries once again. Kalen felt his old existential panic freeze his muscles as he watched the brown water rise toward their newly finished work. His mind immediately began to replay the previous collapse, telling him with absolute certainty that their morning of labor was about to be completely erased by the flood. He braced his shoulders, preparing himself for the familiar pain of loss. But as the heavy current slammed into the woven willow fence, the structure performed in a way that Kalen had never seen before. The flexible wattle barrier did not stand rigid against the impact of the water. Instead, the entire screen bent gracefully into the current, its green pillars leaning downstream to accommodate the immense volume of the flood. Because the fence was porous, it did not try to stop the river completely. The water was allowed to pass freely through the tiny open gaps between the woven branches, losing its destructive velocity as it filtered through the wood. The river could not break the structure because there was no hard point of resistance for its weight to smash against. The willow yielded entirely to the power of the water, and in yielding, it remained completely unbroken. Even more remarkably, as the muddy current filtered through the tight gaps of the weave, the heavy mountain silt and the rich river clay began to catch on the green twigs. The flowing dirt settled behind the fence, filling the empty hollow of the eroded bank with a fresh, thick layer of fertile earth. The river was not destroying their work. It was actually contributing its own material to reinforce the bank, using the flexible willow fence as a cradle to rebuild the landscape. Kalen stood on the dry ground above the fence, a profound, quiet realization washing through his entire awareness. He looked at the brown water flowing harmlessly through the green branches, and then he looked down at his own clean, unblistered palms. He saw that his long years of building rigid fortresses had been a form of internal blindness. He had believed that the only way to survive the changing world was to remain completely unyielding, fighting the river of life until his own fibers were snapped by the pressure. But the willow had shown him a deeper, far more sustainable path to inner peace. True transformation does not mean you become an invincible monument that never encounters a storm. It means you develop the capacity to bend with the reality that is already here. He chose to stop his old habit of treating every anxious thought as an absolute command. He looked at the rising river, and instead of letting his mind sprint into the future to build scenarios of disaster, he simply sat down on an old cedar stump near the weaving site. He allowed his body to remain complete still in the cold winter air, choosing to sit with the uncertainty of his unfinished yard without needing to control the water. He was no longer a panicked craftsman trying to fight a changing universe. He had found a small, real act of internal discipline, choosing to breathe before he reacted, and letting the river shape the valley in its own unhurried time. The silent winter current continues its long journey through the valley, moving past the woven wattle fence without a single moment of hesitation. When we reflect on Kalen sitting quietly on that cedar stump, we are witnessing the exact moment a human spirit stops fighting the natural laws of existence. He did not find an immediate recipe to restore his old inventory of timber. He did not receive a magical guarantee that the next spring melt would be perfectly gentle. His true liberation lived entirely within the quiet choice to stop treating the altered riverbank as a personal battlefield. He allowed his internal state to match the open space of the clearing. Let us explore the deep psychological machinery that keeps your own mind awake during these long night hours. When a sudden disruption shatters a life structure you spent decades assembling, your intellect does not merely experience the raw sorrow of the transition. It immediately sets to work trying to find an absolute explanation through self-reproach. You begin a relentless process of internal tracking, replaying old conversations and analyzing old choices to locate the exact moment you failed to predict the storm. You believe that if you can just hold on to enough shame, you can somehow correct your vulnerability and prevent the river of change from ever touching your life again. This habit of turning a temporary structural loss into a permanent definition of your identity is the true source of your exhaustion tonight. You look at the empty space where your position or your relationship used to rest, and you tell yourself that you are uniquely flawed. You believe that everyone else possesses a secret, unshakable foundation, while you are destined to remain an exposed survivor of a continuous disaster. You begin to construct an internal scaffold made entirely of your past regrets, carrying the heavy weight of your old failures wherever you walk. You have turned your sudden grief into a rigid prison, trying to find security by constantly picking at the raw splinters of your yesterday. One of the great insights of the Buddha was that our lives are defined by two completely different types of discomfort. The first pain is the raw event that life brings to your door without your permission. It is the sudden cloudburst that washes away a mountain path, the unexpected ending of a long partnership, or the quiet betrayal that leaves your trust completely dismantled. These occurrences are the unmapped weather of a changing universe. They are heavy, they are cold, and they are entirely outside your personal capacity to control. You cannot command the marketplace to always preserve your career, and you cannot force the conditions of the world to remain perfectly static for your convenience. This primary sting is simply the reality of being alive. The true suffering grows when your mind refuses to let the original wound rest on the ground. We layer an immense amount of internal resistance, control, and judgment onto the empty space. To understand this clearly, imagine a traveler who arrives at a wide mountain river only to find that the old wooden footbridge has been completely swept away by an early morning torrent. The missing bridge is the first pain. It is a real obstacle, it is cold, and it requires him to change his route through the valley. The secondary suffering is the heavy burden the traveler creates when he refuses to accept the reality of the empty water. Instead of looking for a shallow place to cross, he spends hours gathering the wet, rotten splinters of the ruined bridge from the mud. He packs them into a massive canvas sack, hoists the heavy load onto his aching shoulders, and insists on carrying the debris along the riverbank for miles. He walks through the beautiful mountain meadows while weeping under the crushing weight of the rotten wood, constantly complaining that the river has ruined his journey. He is suffering intensely, not because the bridge is gone, but because he is refusing to walk through the valley without carrying the wreckage on his back. Now let this wisdom come closer to your own life tonight. The quietness of your bedroom is simply the empty riverbank where the old bridge used to stand. The sharp, suffocating pressure in your chest is the heavy canvas sack of splinters you have been carrying through the dark hours. You are demanding that your history remain completely unbroken before you give your nervous system permission to rest. You believe that if you stop thinking about your disruption for even a single hour, you will lose your protection and disappear from reality completely. But your spirit is not destroyed by an empty clearing. It is simply exhausted by the relentless labor of your resistance. True inner freedom does not mean you discover a way to prevent the mountain rivers from ever rising again. Peace is a completely different relationship with the difficulty that is already here. When a cold wave of panic enters your awareness tonight, telling you that your future is entirely ruined because your old structure collapsed, you do not have to obey its text. You do not have to lift a heavy hammer of overthinking to fight the thought. You can look at the worry with immense compassion, recognize its rigid oak fibers, and let it float past your awareness without trying to wedge it into a permanent truth. By refusing to fight the emptiness of your current situation, you are removing the internal friction that keeps your muscles locked in a state of alarm. You are allowing your mind to be like that flexible wattle fence, letting the changing currents of life pass freely through your awareness without breaking your spirit. You are reminding your tired brain that it is safe to be completely unresolved at midnight. The environment that excluded you does not hold the master key to your internal temple, and the career that ended does not possess the power to erase your light. You can retire from your position as the frantic architect of a past that no longer exists. In a moment, this transformation will show us how to bring this quiet buoyancy into the small choices of your upcoming morning. But as you lie here in the soft shadow of the night, notice how much less energy it takes to sit flat on the gravel than to hold up a falling log. You are practicing the ultimate art of spiritual non-resistance. You are allowing the natural gravity of sleep to pull you downward, away from the loud groans of your self-criticism, and into the cool, spacious channel of pure existence. The empty ground beneath your body is not a site of ruin. It is a clean, wide baseline where your spirit is finally free to rest without a weight. Think of how much vitality you save when you stop treating your transition as a permanent state of failure. You allow your breath to drop into your belly. You let your tight jaw unhinge, and you give your tired palms permission to open completely against the linen sheets. The universe knows how to hold your life together without your constant midnight calculations. You do not have to build a new fortress before the sun rises. You can let the broken pegs of your old plans rest quietly in the mud of your memory, and trust that the vast, unwritten clearing of the night is exactly where your soul needs to rest to remember its unshakable wholeness. Let us take this green willow wisdom away from the mountain gorge. We must bring its fluid strength straight into the rooms where your daily life takes place. You do not spend your mornings clearing wet mud from an empty riverbank. You do not handle rough logs or split timber with your fingers. You live in a fast world made of glass screens, sudden emails, and shifting financial numbers. The modern storms that hit your life do not arrive with the loud roar of a mountain cloudburst. They often arrive in absolute silence, appearing as a sudden notification or a brief meeting behind a closed office door. Yet the internal contraction you feel is exactly the same pressure that Kalen encountered at his flooded bend. Think of how you handle a small, sudden disruption during your ordinary day. Perhaps you are waiting for a specific response on your phone, and the screen remains completely dark for hours. Your intellect immediately begins to act like a panicked craftsman. You feel a cold tightness in your chest, and your thoughts begin to spin at high velocity. You replay your past messages, trying to find the exact error you made. You try to look into the upcoming week, constructing desperate plans to fix the other person's mood. In that single moment of waiting, you are attempting to force a rigid structure upon an unpredictable current. You are trying to wedge a broken joint with your worries. Maybe you know the deep exhaustion of lying awake at midnight after a major professional setback. Your position has been eliminated, or a project you labored over for months has been abruptly canceled by your company. The outer structure of your security has vanished. You look toward your future, and you see nothing but a dark, muddy torrent of total uncertainty. Out of pure survival instinct, your mind begins to run through the wreckage. You rehearse every conversation, trying to find a way to make the broken pieces stand up straight again. This is the pattern of mental rigidity that turns your bed into a site of deep fatigue. You are treating a temporary shift in the landscape as if it were a permanent sentence of personal ruin. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal. We can see this same exhausting habit when we compare our lives to the people around us. You look at the polished displays of your peers, and you believe they possess unshakable fortresses that never crack. You see their promotions, their steady families, and their clear timelines. Then you look at your own empty, disrupted clearing, and you feel an overwhelming sense of shame. Your mind whispers that you are lagging far behind the rest of the world. It tells you that you are uniquely flawed because your structure has fallen. This comparison is like trying to hammer an unyielding oak peg into a bank of shifting sand. You are punishing your own spirit for failing to be a stone monument. Consider how much energy you consume when you try to pretend that everything is perfectly fine. You put on a bright, professional smile during a difficult meeting, while your chest feels like a hollow crescent of mud. You answer inquiries with a cheerful voice, assuring everyone that you have everything under control. Yet underneath the performance, your muscles are locked in a state of absolute panic. You are trying to act like an unbending wall of timber, because you are terrified that if you show a single splinter of your true grief, the entire world will realize you are unprotected. This constant defense is what truly strips away your vitality before the afternoon is over. But true inner peace does not require your outer life to be completely flawless before you can rest. Wisdom is practiced in the very small, ordinary moments of your morning routine. It begins when you feel a sudden wave of irritation or panic rising in your throat during a difficult conversation. Instead of instantly reaching for an aggressive word to defend your territory, you can choose to pause. You can take one slow, conscious breath before you allow your voice to answer. You can let the initial sting of the comment pass cleanly through your awareness, just like the muddy river filtered through the open gaps of the willow fence. You are allowing the current to move without letting it break your internal alignment. This simple pause is a profound act of psychological discipline. In that brief pocket of time, you are letting the rough hemp lines of your control slip from your bare palms. You are allowing your landscape to be temporarily unresolved, without believing that you are going to disappear from reality. When an anxious thought enters your mind, declaring that your life is a total failure because your plans have changed, you do not have to obey its command. You can look at the worry with great gentleness, recognize its rigid structure, and let it float downstream. You are letting the river handle the weight of the debris while you remain safe on the shore. We can apply this soft, porous posture to the way we hold our most valued relationships. When the fear of sudden separation strikes our hearts, we often try to grip the people we love with a suffocating tightness. We demand constant reassurance. We try to manage their moods, and we try to force their feelings into a rigid design that makes us feel secure. This white-knuckle clenching is the exact mechanism that introduces fracture into our homes. When you remember the lesson of the willow, you learn how to care deeply without turning your love into a heavy cage. You can allow the other person to navigate their own storms without treating their temporary silence as an active emergency for your own worth. You are also fully permitted to grant your tired body a total exemption from labor tonight. You do not need to earn your right to rest by completing a specific blueprint of achievements before dawn. Many of us want to rest, but we feel a deep, burning guilt the moment our hands go idle. We believe that if we are not constantly rebuilding our security, we are being lazy or irresponsible. But this guilt is simply the voice of your old panic, trying to force you back into the freezing water to hold up a fallen log. Rest is not a reward that you receive after you have conquered the universe. It is the very soil that allows your spirit to recover its natural flexibility. Look at your physical frame lying in the quiet of this dark room. The modern marketplace has finally closed its doors for the evening. The messages have stopped arriving. The social comparisons have gone silent, and the frantic demands of the daytime world have pulled back into the fog. You have carried a very heavy burden of responsibility through a very turbulent season, and your nervous system is fully entitled to a complete cessation of effort. You do not have to be a successful provider, a flawless partner, or a brilliant strategist in this silent hour. You can lay your heavy tools down in the mud, allowing the thick, protective dark of the night to envelope your fatigue without a single demand. Think of how much lighter your upcoming morning will be when you stop treating your transitions as a personal disaster. An unexpected change will occur at your workplace, and you will choose to breathe rather than let your mind sprint into a loop of panic. A plan will dissolve, leaving you with an empty weekend, and you will meet the open space with a soft, receptive heart instead of an anxious calculation. You will move through your life with a completely altered quality of presence. Your shoulders will be loose, your throat will be open, and your awareness will be anchored in the crisp reality of the present step. You will no longer be a panicked craftsman drowning in the ruins of your old designs, but a wide, deep channel that knows how to let the water flow in its own unhurried time. Let this understanding settle into the physical framework of your ribs as you prepare for sleep. The complex structures you are trying to rebuild are nothing but silver shadows that will alter their shapes before the sun rises. You cannot buy a permanent guarantee of safety through 3 more hours of midnight overthinking. Let the heavy oak beams of your old ambition slide into the deep current. Allow the soft mist of the evening to absorb your unvoiced questions, and let your body remember that it belongs to the stable earth beneath you, completely independent of your structural success. You are safe enough to open your hands in the dark. The deep winter midnight has now completely enveloped the wide river channel. Outside the quiet walls of this sanctuary, the mountain waters have finally found a slower, steadier rhythm. The frantic crest of the autumn flood has passed long ago, leaving behind a vast, silent expanse of dark water that flows smoothly over the rounded stones. The green willow branches of the wattle fence are resting quietly in the current, bending without effort, allowing the cool fluid to slide through their open spaces. The heavy mountain silt has settled into the quiet hollows of the bank, creating a soft, deep bed of rich clay that rests undisturbed under the midnight sky. The old wood piles are dark, the heavy iron mallets are silent, and the entire timber yard has accepted the peaceful emptiness of the season. The high peaks are quiet, holding the winter snow without a single movement. The landscape itself has stopped its intense labor tonight. The rising currents have returned to their natural boundaries, leaving nothing but a thin, pale mist that drifts weightlessly over the open water. The frayed hemp ropes lay completely motionless in the dark moss, their fibers loose, their ends no longer strained by the weight of a falling structure. Down in the valley, the memories of old betrayals and the fear of sudden endings have been entirely claimed by the vast silence of the clearing. They no longer require your tired intellect to calculate their shape or to measure their damage. The wooden stakes are steady in the earth, holding no rigid resistance and demanding no immediate repairs from your blistered fingers. The broken oak pegs have dropped into the deep silt, allowing the cool, dark river to carry away their sharpest edges. Let your own physical form become one with this deep, fluid stillness. Your breathing has slowed down to a very quiet, effortless rhythm. It is a soft, natural rising and falling in the darkness that requires no engineering from your thoughts. With each long, gentle exhalation, feel your limbs growing heavier against the mattress. Imagine your muscles are softening directly into the unmoving cedar framework of your bed, relaxing their guard completely. Your hands are perfectly still, resting open on the linen sheets, entirely free of the day's frantic pulling. Your arms are heavy and warm, fully supported by a stable ground that does not require you to hold up a single sagging beam tonight. The lingering tension in your spine is dissolving into the shadows, releasing its final grip on the structural burdens of your yesterday. Your head rests heavily against the fabric of your pillow. You are cradled by a quiet room that keeps no ledger of your failures and demands no architectural plans before it agrees to shelter your spirit. the complex career designs you are trying to rescue, the social roles you have been straining to maintain, and the raw fear of being unprotected have all been left far behind on the mountain path. Your thoughts are completely empty of tools, resting quietly like smooth willow rods that have found their permanent place in the soft bank, entirely detached from the velocity of the world. You are permitted to let the ropes slide completely into the moss. You are safe enough to let your awareness drop into the quiet currents below. The loud groans of the collapsing timbers have finally run out of resonance inside your mind. The frantic scenarios that kept your heart racing during the day have dissolved back into the wide, deep channel of your consciousness, leaving your chest feeling remarkably spacious, cool, and light. The fear of being left behind in the wreckage has lost its momentum in this silent room. The burning guilt of your exhaustion has washed away in the dark river mist. You are not a ruined entity simply because your old plans have been dismantled by the water. You are the wide, receptive riverbed itself, a beautiful sanctuary of pure awareness that remains entirely whole without a single wooden fortress to defend its value. The clearing is open, and you are free to soften. Let the gentle lesson of the woven wattle fence settle into the deep tissues of your heart. The eroded bank does not panic because its soil has changed shape, and the green willow branch does not feel shame because it bends into the torrent. They know that the empty space left by the flood is not a site of destruction, but a necessary baseline where the earth recovers its original rhythm. You do not need to build a new empire before the sun rises to prove your right to exist. Peace is the fundamental ground that allows your spirit to recover its natural flexibility. When you choose to leave your worries unresolved and allow your life to remain completely unwritten for the evening, you are practicing a profound, wordless wisdom. You are letting your rigid walls become water. Feel the slow, organic expansion of your lungs as you drift deeper into the current of rest. There is no evaluation waiting for you in this dark hour, and there is no ledger being kept in the silence of the night. The unmade decisions, the sudden separations, and the unknown horizons of your career can all remain exactly as they are. They will wait quietly in the gray mist of the valley, and they will not grow heavier while you close your eyes. The night belongs entirely to non-resistance, a holy harbor where the demand to hold up a heavy life is completely canceled. You have carried a massive framework through a very turbulent season, and your nervous system is fully entitled to this absolute cessation of effort. Your face is completely soft, your jaw is loose, and your throat is wide. The skin around your eyes is as smooth as the wet stones after the river has finished its daily carving. You are no longer a panicked craftsman trying to force a dead design to stand against a rising flood, and you are no longer bracing your muscles against the movement of time. You have allowed the rough lines to slip from your palms, letting the jagged splinters of your history dissolve into the wide, warm pool of your awareness, while your chest releases its final layer of pressure in a single, quiet breath that disappears into the dark air. You are returning home to your own unshakable clearing, a space that has never been broken by the sudden storms of the world. Allow your awareness to drift away into the dark, weightless thickness of this unconditional sleep. The busy marketplace outside your room will continue to spin through its complex patterns without your assistance. The snow will fall all by itself on the ridges. The river will carve its own path through the clay, and the morning will bring its own light when the landscape is ready. You do not have to reconstruct your entire destiny tonight, dear friend. You only need to let the wide channel of the night hold your emotional fatigue, sinking down, breath by breath, shadow by shadow, into the vast, unbothered stillness of the deep, empty dark. And what if the unshakable foundation you spent your whole life trying to build with hard timber was actually the very ground that has been waiting for you to fall?